One of the new blur settings that we have inside of Photoshop CS6 is going to be under the filter menu when you go down to blur. It's called field blur. And it's kind of cool because it saves us. Could we do something similar with Gaussian blur and layers and masks and all these things? We definitely could, but you're going to see in a second here that field blur kind of lets us be a little bit more creative without worrying about some of the technical details of what we would have to do if we were to do this a different way. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so we had the wedding photo here. We've got the rings in the middle. You've got the flowers and everything. So let's say, we want to blur things out. We really want people to focus on the rings. Well, you start off when you go into field blur with this it's like a little dot, okay? And all you got to do is you move this dot around over what you want to be blurred, and then you control the blur amount over on the right-hand side. So I can take it down low, or I can increase it. So maybe I want the roses to be a little blurred, but not very blurred. Now the problem is so far I've blurred everything in the photo, okay? What you can do is you click again, and now it adds another blur. So now I can move this blur around, and let's say I really want to blur the stuff over here. All right, so I can get crazy with that and really blur it out quite a bit more than what I blurred over here. Notice they're two totally independent little blur pins that are on here, okay? And I can click on this one and I can select it and I can make it blurrier or not blurrier. But here's the cool part, is you could see by what's going on here, it is blurring the entire photo, all right? Well, if I go here and I drop a pin on the rings and I take the blur all the way down to 0, check out what happens. See that? So now I've left this area to be totally crisp, but I've gone over here and I've blurred this area and I've blurred this area. And I can move these guys around if I want to. I can kind of move them in, and you can even see you get a live preview. So this is definitely different technology than we're used to inside of Photoshop. When it comes to filters and the way that we use filters, it is very, very different. Okay, so I can move this around. You can see the closer I get, but because I have this one over here with 0 blur, it's almost kind of protecting that part of the photo, right? So I can just kind of change this around here. Get it right about there. All right, maybe even take it down a little bit. It might have been a little too blurry. There's a little preview checkbox right at the top here. You can see before and then after. And then when you're done, you just click OK, and it applies the blurs. What it did there is something that we could have done had we used layers and applied Gaussian blur to one layer, and then maybe applied a bigger Gaussian blur to another layer, and we used layer masks and everything to paint it in and out. It was essentially the same thing, except we did it, I think, in a much less technical way, much more creative way. So it lets us helps us get it done easier, I guess is the whole point. I want to show you one more example of what you can do with this. It's more of a fun example. Think of it as something that could be used just to create cool looking backgrounds. Open up a picture you took at night, okay? And we've all seen those really shallow depth of field type of images that we've seen, shot with like a 50 1.4 1.2 or an 85 1.4, where when you shoot it at 1.4, if you're shooting it at night, the lights, the bokeh in the background, or bokeh depending on what school or religion that you happen to be in, they get really big. Here's the best way to show you is, let me just go up here to the filter menu, go down to blur, go to field blur. And in this example, I'm just going to move this off to the side just because it gets annoying. But we'll come over here and I'm just going to increase the blur setting. And check that out. Watch what starts to happen. But here's the magic of this whole setting, is you come over here and you go to light bokeh. And see how I can start to bring out those lights? So you can create some really interesting backgrounds when you start to do this, because now you're just totally blurring it out. But it's different than a Gaussian blur. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of here. Let me duplicate the layer. And let's do this. Command or Control J. Okay. And we'll duplicate our layer so that we've got a separate copy of it. So I'll go Filter, Blur. I'll go to Gaussian blur. Okay. And I'll crank it up, down, right? I mean, look, it eventually smooths it until it's like one continuous tone, right? So it's eventually just going to smooth it. But we'll go ahead and we'll kind of crank it up to maybe where we can still see, right about there, where we can see some of the lights, okay? And then I'll hide that layer. Command or Control J again, and we'll go Filter, Blur. We'll go to the field blur, and I'll do the same thing. Again, I can move it off. It's not affecting anything. It's just going to blur the whole image. It just lets me get that annoying little pin out of there. Okay, and then come over here and start to change that light bokeh. And you'll start to see the difference. You can even change the color if you want. See, it kind of saturates a little bit more. You can even change the range. Like right now, it's just going to work on, when you see this little gradient down here, the two sliders are over on the right. That means it's just going to work on the bright lights. But if I move them, I start expanding it to work on more area, more parts of the photo. Okay, it's almost like levels, but levels inside of a blur filter. Okay, make that a little bit bigger. Maybe increase that a little bit. Hit OK. So remember, I did this on a separate layer so we can compare the difference of the two blurs, right? That's the original. That is our field blur, which is going to simulate more of like that 85 1.4, that really shallow depth of field. And then this is Gaussian blur. Big difference, right? Totally big difference. This is more of what we would see if we used a camera. This is more what we see when we just use a blur filter inside of Photoshop. So definitely something you guys should check out. It's got some very creative potential when it comes to working in Photoshop. And the filters you can see here, they're going in a very, very different direction than all the other filters that we're used to using. We get these little pins. We get our settings over here. We get a lot more control and a lot more areas that we can use to be creative with some of the blurs in Photoshop. Folks, my name is Matt Kluskowski. Hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you again very soon.